Hello and welcome to Shield's Journey into the Unknown. This is part 7, Forward unto Duna. Did we forget something? So this is my overkill craft to get to Duna. It was overkill for two reasons. First, I had just unlocked the large KW Rocketry stuff and I've never used it before, so I wanted to build a craft with it. And second, I wanted to make a craft and see how much fuel I would have left once I got to another planet. Turns out this vessel will have a lot of fuel when it gets to Duna. And I like having a lot of fuel because I have a refueling station without doing anything. Anyway, this craft is abundantly large, and those solid rocket boosters on the sides are, I have to say, pretty ridiculous. Like, they give 1600 thrust by themselves and they last for a minute. That's crazy. And they have gimbling. Like, I don't know what more you could ask for in a solid rocket booster. Now, something I should say about this launch is this was done after the fact because I had done the launch and everything went all fine and dandy. And I noticed later when I was making this movie that I didn't actually have the initial launch because I forgot to start recording until I was in orbit around Kerbal. So, I had to redo this launch, and one thing I noticed about this craft was it isn't aerodynamic at all, and if I turned it over before 25,000 kilometers above the surface, it would just flip out, and so that's the reason for this horrible ascent path, but hey, got the job done and has retarded amounts of fuel. And the last problem that this ship had is I had the nuclear engines in a pulling orientation. I just neglected to put a probe core on the bottom end flipped around so that I would have the correct orientation on the Navball. So this entire trip, whenever I was using that orange tank for the pulling, I had to do the Navball completely backwards and guesstimate where the burn reticle, I guess it would be on the opposite side of the nav ball. So like I'd do my calculations, I'd make note of what numbers they were on the nav ball, and then I'd have to flip around to the exact opposite side and burn that way and watch the bar go down. And if it started slowing down randomly, I would know that I'm not burning in the correct area anymore, and I'd have to go and figure out why. It was a fun mission overall, something I've never had to deal with, and I liked it. Alright, so this is the problem that I was just explaining earlier. I'm using those 6 nuclear engines instead of the 3 because I didn't design the craft very well for the 3 engines. At least when I have the giant tank on the back. Because one of the engines was conflicting with one of the parts down on the orange tank or something like that. And it would always want to turn to one of the sides. I forget which side, but it always wanted to pull to one side, and the SAS and gimbling wouldn't be able to counter it, so I just use those 6 engines. And so as you can see, I have to like make the maneuver node and then figure out where it is on the opposite side and then do that node. And it was special, but I got to Duna and it was far less painful than I would have ever expected it to be. Alright, now that we're at Duna, we're in a new biome, I guess. I still don't like the word biome for KSP. But anyway, we do the normal sciencey things, and this is when I notice, hey, that science lab that I've been hauling around so I could, do science and do it with only the 2 parts. It doesn't have any crew in it, so like, I'm like, well, crap. Well, let's just get into a stable orbit and we'll send a bus out with a couple of scientists or dimwits, whatever the game decides to give me. And, yeah, so just adding extra length to this mission that I didn't expect. At this point, I'm just slowing down to get into a stable orbit. Takes forever because this craft is really heavy and it only has the 6 nuclear engines for thrust. So its thrust to weight ratio is pretty low. Alright, so we're getting close to a stable orbit. I'm just leery about having a high orbit because I've done this before around Duna, in fact, in a previous playthrough back in 0.22. And I left the craft in a relatively high orbit, and when I came back to the craft later after sending another craft out to Duna, it was just gone and like had encountered the sun or something because it was just like gone except for a couple pieces of debris. I don't know, but the game thought it was in a stable orbit, but Time Warp told it wasn't, so it just went off and did its own thing and blew up. So this futzing about was mainly just reassurance for me so that it was in a stable orbit high enough to avoid Ike, but low enough to not get thrown out into space during Time Warp. Alright, so here's my interplanetary science bus. It should have enough fuel to get anywhere in the universe. And those solid rocket boosters, if I had done a better ascent path, would have been enough to go from the launch pad into a stable orbit without ever touching a liquid fuel engine. So the solid rocket boosters are more than slightly overpowered for this craft, but hey, it gives me essentially a full orange tank for orbit. So if I wanted to make a Kerbal stationary refueling platform, this craft could actually become a refueling platform, one orange tank at a time, for the cost of no liquid fuel almost. At this point, I'm just looking for a departure window for Duna. It's not going to be optimal by any stretch of the imagination, but I don't care because this craft just needs to get out to Duna. It doesn't need to return or anything. And heck, we have that 5 times KW Rocketry fuel tank out there that is somewhere above half. It's a lot left of fuel. So even if we burn up every ounce of fuel getting into an orbit around Duna, there will be a way to fully refuel this craft and send it off to Joule if we decided to do that. But we're not going to be doing that. It's just is going to Duna to bring the scientists to the lab so that we can actually go down to the surface of Duna and do all the science there and then head off to Ike. A liquid fuel. Alright, so that orange fuel tank is now spent. The main sail attached to it almost got us an encounter with Duna from Kerbin, so that's pretty handy. At this point, only slight changes are needed to get a full encounter with Duna, which we can do pretty easily with the nuclear engines that we currently have. And then we can get these scientists onto the science lab and continue on with the Duna mission. Alright, about to get into Duna's SOI and see how bad the inclination will be. Oh, that is an awful inclination change that we're going to have to make. Fortunately, it won't cost much fuel because the further out we are, the more effective an engine is at changing an inclination. Skipping ahead to the inclination change, just see me futzing around trying to get relatively good inclination relative to the craft that I'm trying to rendezvous with. And in total, it only takes 140 some delta V, which is pretty good considering it was like 90 degrees off. Alright, so at this point we just do the inclination change, which doesn't take that long considering it's a relatively short burn. Then we're going to skip ahead to when we're almost rendezvoused. The reason I'm skipping the rendezvous is because it's tedious to both watch and talk over, because I have nothing left to talk about for rendezvous. So, yeah, the craft's rendezvous, and it's time to transfer the Kerbals over to the science lab. But the continuation of this mission where we land on Duna and then head off to Ike will be in the next episode. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye now.